Tonight, an I-Team exclusive, a mega house for a mega church pastor. NBC Charlotte's I-Team has confirmed that Elevation Church pastor Stephen Furtick is building a 16,000 square foot home in Weddington.
News of the multi-million-dollar mansion prompted NBC Charlotte I-Team reporter Stuart Watson to do what investigative reporters do best: follow the money.
Now, Elevation Church is the largest megachurch in North Carolina, and there's no question that Elevation and its pastor, Stephen Furtick, have done a lot of good. The church has just passed the $10 million mark in gifts to charities like Samaritan's Purse and Crisis Assistance Ministry. Full disclosure, members of our staff attend Elevation, and the church is paid to air its services on NBC Charlotte and its banner ads on WCNC.com. But when the I-Team learned that Furtick was building a $1.7 million home, we started asking hard questions. This is the story of the House of Stephen.
Let's be a generation known for what we stand for. Let's be a generation known for what we love.
In the beginning, Stephen Furtick created Elevation Church.
He's a rock and roll star.
His followers are called elevators. These elevators only went up.
Good morning, welcome to Elevation.
From 14 people to 14,000 in less than 8 years.
Good morning, guys, welcome.
With even bigger plans for the future.
The Lord's going to enable us to be one of the first churches in the United States to have 100,000 people.
He's one part preacher, one part celebrity.
Stephen Furtick!
Headlining all over the world.
Don't you ever let anyone talk you out of what God put in you.
He's not a club band anymore, he's a stadium band.
His church giving more than $10 million to charity and hundreds of thousands of hours of volunteer work.
Pastor Stephen Furtick, I want to tell you thank you.
Now the man who just calls himself Pastor Stephen is more popular than the church he built, with 4 times more followers on Twitter than Elevation Church itself.
The book is called Greater, and it's about dreaming bigger.
Stephen Furtick is his own brand, profiting from book sales and paid personal appearances around the world.
And people are asking me, like, are you really going back to Australia again?
So the pastor keeps making more money and more money and more money.
Now Stephen Furtick is spending a lot of that money on a 16,000 square foot house. It has 7.5 bathrooms. Building permits put the contract value of the house alone just shy of $1.4 million. The land cost another $325,000 for a total cost of more than $1.7 million. You can't see the house from the street. It's behind a no trespassing sign off Lockhaven Road in Weddington. Hidden by 19¼ acres of dense woods, Furtick's name is nowhere on the deed. Instead, the property is in the name of the Jumper Drive Trust.
The pastor should be the servant of his people, and he should be the one that's the most transparent.
Ole Anthony of the Trinity Foundation in Dallas, Texas, belongs to a small church.
Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe.
He believes preachers should give up their big houses.
It saddens me to see what the church is becoming.
And get back to the Christian church's humble beginnings.
There, the pastors lived as the poorest of the poor, not the richest of the rich.
For 7 weeks, we've tried to talk to Stephen Furtick about his multi-million-dollar home. We've sent emails, made phone calls, sent a registered letter, even made one face-to-face personal appeal. He's always declined until one Sunday he brought me up in his sermon.
So I've been feeling sorry for myself lately because they told me this news reporter is trying to do this story where he wants to make our church look bad.
Then he described his multi-million-dollar home as, quote, not that great.
Well, me and Holly this year, we're building a house. We've been looking for a piece of land to build a house for our family for a long time. So I'm like building this house and I'm real excited about it and everything. But then I found out, this is crazy, the news tried to fly this chopper over our house. The people that are building it told us, they're flying a chopper over your house. I'm thinking to myself, first of all, it's not that great of a house. I mean, I'm sure there's better houses if you just got to fly a chopper over somebody's house. But it started to mess with me a little bit. And then I started to get a little self-pity because I was like, God, now this ain't right, because I didn't even build that house with money from the church. I built it with money from my books, and I gave money to the church from the books. And you start getting real defensive and being like, this ain't right, this ain't right.
I'm sorry, but there's something wrong with that.
Chris Roseborough runs Pirate Christian Radio from his home in suburban Indianapolis. It's a kind of protest podcast against preacher profiteers.
There's no distinction between Elevation Church and Stephen's books. The two get meshed together in a way that oftentimes creates a real conflict, because the job of a pastor is not to preach his book. The primary place that, let's just say, advertises the message of the book is Elevation Church.
Elevation Church paid for full-page ads promoting the book. Elevation Church paid to air sermons featuring the book on TV stations, including WCNC.
You're going to give something away for every person that purchases Greater.
Elevation Church packed up swag to sell the book.
Child gets a backpack for every copy of Greater. Somebody called this a gimmick the other day, and I thought it was just like always a good thing to do to give a poor child who can't afford a backpack full of supplies. I was like, didn't know that fell under the category of gimmick.
Elevation lead pastor Chunks Corbett tells me the books help the church tremendously in 3 ways. First, Furtick arranges for the publisher to sell books by the thousands to Elevation Church at his author's discount. So Elevation Church makes money on the book, but no one will say how much. Second, Furtick donates some of his own advance money to Elevation Church. Corbett says he's very generous, but no one will say how much. Third, the publisher pays Elevation Church outright to produce slick videos marketing the book, but no one will say how much. All this makes Elevation Church sound like just one more private business.
I mean, is he not doing the exact same thing that the money changers were doing in the temple? Basically using God's house to make a profit? I mean, this is exactly the same behavior. You know what Jesus did? He made a cord of whips and drove those damn people out of God's house. The church does not exist for this.
While the nonprofit tax-exempt church paid for the promotion, the profits from the book paid Furtick himself. Profits that he says bought the multi-million-dollar home.
I would also argue that it's not exactly suffering for Jesus.
Warren Cole Smith is a Charlotte author and editor at The World, a Christian magazine.
That's sort of the dirty little secret of megachurch pastors, is that they use this church as a platform, and then they sell books, and then they make a lot of money on the side.
Yet Elevation Church has asked volunteers and employees alike to sign this confidentiality agreement. The agreement threatens to sue volunteers and members if they disclose church finances.
If Stephen Furtick's followers and the congregation at Elevation want to pay him these outlandish salaries, want to allow him to live in multi-million-dollar homes, that's up to them. They're the ones that are contributing the money, but they should know that.
And many churches believe that the congregation, the people, the followers, should get a say in the pastor's salary and his housing allowance through these elected elders or deacons in the church. But at Elevation Church, this is a closely guarded secret. And tomorrow night, the I-Team will report on the men who set Stephen Furtick's salary. They are not elected, and none of them are even members of Elevation Church.
Now at 6, our I-Team broke the story of the mega church pastor's 16,000 square foot mansion. Tonight, the question is, who sets his salary?
And who holds him accountable? The I-Team's Stuart Watson found Elevation isn't run like most churches, raising questions of accountability.
So maybe you've been feeling sorry for your scars a little bit lately.
Pastor Stephen Furtick has made generous giving a cornerstone at Elevation Church.
It's crazy. We just passed the mark of $10 million given in the lifetime of this church to organizations outside of the church.
But Pastor Stephen will not tell you how much he gets paid. So when I started asking about it, he preached about me.
There's an investigative reporter. He's been calling around, and people have been calling us.
Furtick and his top lieutenants refuse to tell the people who pay his salary, the congregation at Elevation Church, just how much he makes.
We don't know. And the reason we don't know is because they won't say.
Warren Cole Smith writes books about the evangelical church from his home in Charlotte.
The real problem is that there's a lack of transparency.
Stephen Furtick recruited a so-called board of overseers to set his salary.
Well, that board of overseers looked to me to be a paper tiger.
The board of overseers is made up entirely of other megachurch pastors just like Stephen Furtick.
The financial well-being of all of these guys are intimately intertwined.
That means Stephen Furtick agrees to pay them to preach at Elevation, and they pay him to preach at their conferences or megachurches.
They attend each other's conferences and are compensated for that regularly.
Elevation executive pastor Chunks Corbett told me, yes, pastors get paid for church appearances, but he said the pay is, quote, small in scope. And no, he will not disclose the amounts. So when Stephen Furtick held his Code Orange revival last year, 3 of the headliners, Pastors Stovall Weems of Jacksonville, Perry Noble of Anderson, South Carolina, and Kevin Gerald of Seattle, were all board members at Elevation. That's 3 of 5 votes that set Furtick's salary.
Yeah, they scratch each other's backs. That's not accountability.
Chris Roseborough runs Pirate Christian Radio from his home near Indianapolis.
All of the accountability in Furtick's church goes from the top down.
Elevation Church was founded by Southern Baptists, got loans through Southern Baptists, still gives missionary money through Southern Baptists. But unlike many Baptist churches, there are no elected deacons or elders here overseeing the church.
None of these guys are actually living in Charlotte, North Carolina.
There is one leader living in the Charlotte area, Chunks Corbett. And if you want to understand Elevation Church, you need to understand his role. Chunks Corbett is the center of Furtick's organization. In 2005, he incorporated Elevation Church. In 2007, Corbin Properties Southeast, a for-profit company. In 2008, he signed on as trustee for the Jumper Drive Trust that held the Furtick's home. And in 2009, he incorporated Sun Stand Still Ministries, another nonprofit. All 4 list the same principal address, 11416 East Independence, Suite N, the location of the Matthews Elevation Church. Chunks Corbett refuses to speak on camera, but he spent 90 minutes with me answering some questions. He praises Stephen Furtick for his generosity to Elevation Church, but he refuses to release the church's audited financial statement or its bylaws, which govern the church. That's in stark contrast to another local megachurch, Forest Hill Church. Forest Hill spells out how its elders are elected right on its website.
We then screen them, we interview them, look at their experience here in the church and their commitment to Christ.
And Forest Hill releases its audited financial statement.
We want to be beyond reproach. We want people to see exactly what this congregation is giving.
Many other evangelical groups, like the Billy Graham Evangelical Association and Samaritan's Purse, release their tax returns by law. So if you give, you might not completely approve of what Franklin Graham gets paid, but at least you know and you get a say. The Baptist State Convention of North Carolina puts a salary chart for preachers right on its website. You can look up what Baptist preachers get paid depending on the size of their congregations. The highest pay for churches over 1,000 members is $231,000 a year. But megachurches like Elevation are in a category all their own. They hire compensation consultants to look at other megachurches, and no one is releasing those numbers. Stuart Watson, NBC Charlotte.
And thank you for staying with us. I'm Dave Wagner.
And I'm Dion Lim. You don't build a house without a blueprint. Stephen Furtick built Elevation Church into North Carolina's largest megachurch and a major player in community giving. But who helped him with that blueprint? The I-Team's Stuart Watson keeps following the money.
Would you join me in welcoming to the Elevation Church stage, Pastor Ed Young.
Stephen Furtick looks to Texas megachurch pastor Ed Young as a mentor, and Young admires Furtick.
The man of the hour, too sweet to be sour. The tower of preaching power, Stephen Furtick.
Ed Young promotes big conferences around the world for pastors who want to build their own megachurches.
It's an ancient L, we're fighting hell. Somebody ring the bell, let me hear you yell.
When Young and his wife Lisa climbed in bed on the roof of their fellowship church to encourage couples to have sex every night,
I just basically suggested to the church for all married couples to have sex for 7 days.
Stephen Furtick was one of the many pastors to Skype in.
Well, rather than a book about the evils of sex, to say this is the way God intended it to be.
Good morning, welcome to Elevation.
Furtick credits Ed Young and his C3 conference with showing him a blueprint for growing Elevation.
No conference has had a greater impact on my life and the life of our church than C3. It was at C3, before we started our church, that I sat in the back of the room and saw for the first time what the local church is capable of. It was through Ed and Lisa Young's leadership that I saw the creative potential of the church.
And Ed Young invited Furtick himself to speak at C3.
Stephen Furtick!
The conferences are one part organization, one part motivation.
Do you really think that you're special and unique and gifted to do what God's called you to do?
I guess a good way to compare it to would be like a big hoorah Amway meeting.
Chris Roseborough runs Pirate Christian Radio from his home in Indianapolis.
Ed Young was one of the guys who very early on, he was an early adopter of this new way of doing church.
And Furtick patterned himself on Young in more ways than one. Young bought a 10,000 square foot home. Furtick bought a 16,000 square foot home. Young's home is worth $1.5 million. Furtick's home costs $1.7 million. Young put his home in the name of the Palomita Revocable Trust. Furtick put his home in the name of the Jumper Drive Revocable Trust.
It sounds like Furtick is copying almost to the letter what Ed Young has done here in Dallas.
Ole Anthony is a church watchdog at the Trinity Foundation in Dallas, Texas.
It's a job to them. It's a business. It's a way they make money.
And here's the most important connection between Ed Young and Stephen Furtick. Ed Young served on Stephen Furtick's board of overseers. That sets Furtick's salary. And our sister station in Dallas, Texas reports Ed Young gets a housing allowance worth $250,000 a year, $250,000 tax-free just for housing. So, how much does Elevation Church pay Stephen Furtick for his housing allowance? No one will say. Executive Pastor Chunks Corbett told me 24 pastors at Elevation are paid a tax-free housing allowance as part of their compensation. He confirms that Furtick took out a construction loan to build his new house. But as to how much Elevation pays Furtick for his housing allowance, no one will say. Stuart Watson, NBC Charlotte.
I don't call this an attack. I don't.
Pastor Stephen Furtick told the congregation at Elevation Church he was sorry if questions about his $1.7 million home had caused them to have difficult conversations.
And having to have those conversations, that really bothered me. And it made me sad, and I am sorry that you had to have those conversations this week. I have always endeavored with everything within me to make this a church that you could always be very proud of.
Furtick first referred to the house as not that great, but in this message, he changed his tone.
Holly and I made a decision to build a house. It's a big house.
Furtick told his followers they could always have copies of audited financial statements of the church, but he has yet to make those public.
I have always promised that this ministry would be a ministry of integrity.
And while he once said reporters were trying to make the church look bad, he now says the media has every right to ask questions.
This is a news story, and the media is not our enemy. They have the right to run any story they choose to run, and people have the right to have any opinion that they choose to have.
And he concluded the response with a promise. He's not going away.
For the next 50 years, I plan on being right here.
Furtick's statement lasted about 8 minutes. We'll put the whole thing on our website. What he did not do and will not do is answer questions, and there are many of them, about his salary, his housing allowance, how much he makes from books and outside speaking fees, all of those promoted by the tax-exempt Elevation Church, and how Elevation Church is governed, not by an elected board of elders, but by a group of fellow megachurch pastors. Stuart Watson, NBC Charlotte. The document is marked confidential. It's important because the church has kept these kinds of numbers secret, even from donors who give Elevation money and taxpayers who give it numerous tax breaks. In fact, Elevation asked staff to sign a confidentiality agreement, acknowledging the church could sue them if they disclose church finances. We're not going to show you all the numbers to minimize any harm to Elevation Church. So, for instance, we won't report on pending real estate deals. But we want to share enough numbers that you'll see just how big and how powerful Elevation is becoming.
I'm Chris, and I'm number 222.
I'm number 8,683.
Number 7,038.
Elevation Church is all about the numbers. It says so right in its founding principles called the Code.
Get to Jesus and be baptized today.
So Elevation counts salvations, 3,785 this year, baptisms, 3,519, and it religiously counts the number of people at each of its 8 locations, now regularly totaling more than 14,000 a week. And this confidential report, obtained by the NBC Charlotte I-Team, shows that the church counts money, lots of money. It's collecting more than $500,000 a week, and Furtick says he discloses all that.
Through the external audit that we voluntarily go through, as well as through the audited income statement and balance sheets that we make available to everyone who's a part of Elevation Church.
That's not even close to full disclosure.
Rusty Leonard founded Ministry Watch, a nonprofit watchdog for donors.
First of all, it's not the full audited financial statements. It's just some pretty pictures that you said that are a portion of the audited financial statements.
This is what a full audited financial statement looks like, and it contains not just numbers, but notes from the auditors in the back. This shows, for instance, if the pastor's wife gets money from a nonprofit that's run by the church. Now, this doesn't mean that they've done anything wrong. It just means there's full disclosure. And Forest Hill Church, another megachurch in town, puts this audited financial statement right on their website. Elevation Church won't show you an audited financial statement with those notes, even if you're a member. Instead, it releases a glossy, full-color annual report that'll tell you the numbers of breath mints a campus pastor eats, how many minutes of AC/DC songs played, and whether the pastor wears a V-neck shirt, but not how much money he made.
I promised that this would always be a ministry of integrity.
Unfortunately, that's just not backed up by the facts. If he was to be truly full of integrity, he would reveal all this information.
Rusty Leonard is willing to publicly question Stephen Furtick's integrity.
You shall overcome!
While at the same time admiring him and wishing him well.
It's sad. It's a great church. Pastor Furtick's a great preacher. He's brought blessings to many. And unfortunately, it's a situation where he allowed this one situation to get out of control right from the get-go of the organization of the church.
No one asked Furtick many hard questions about money until he bought a $1.7 million home on 19 1/4 acres near Weddington.
If Pastor Furtick had bought a house that was $400,000 or $500,000, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. You know, and that's a big house. That's a lot of house. But there wouldn't be a big uproar about it. Unfortunately, he went way over the top.
Elevation Church keeps Furtick's salary, tax-free housing allowance, contracts, book deals, speaking fees, and any other for-profit work all a secret.
A church doesn't have to tell you anything about anything. They are not required by law to tell you one bean of information.
And Rusty Leonard says that secrecy doesn't just hurt Elevation, it hurts other churches too.
Non-Christians could say, well, why are we giving these guys these breaks, these tax breaks? And in the end, it could be detrimental to the whole church community.
This confidential planning document shows just how big the tax-free church is getting. Without disclosing individual real estate deals, we can report Elevation plans to spend $86 million on 5 new locations, including 3 the church has not yet reported, Rock Hill, University, and Matthews. That's $86 million to build a bigger platform for Stephen Furtick. It includes more than $9 million just for audio, video, and lights. Elevation Chief Financial Officer Chunks Corbett emailed us a statement saying, while the numbers are accurate, they represent far more than our church is undertaking. Other projects identified in the report you've come into possession of represent potential opportunities we are looking at in the future. Furthermore, to total these projects, assuming they're all going to happen, would be categorically false, as many are options for the same project and some may never materialize. And when Elevation buys property, like the old Palace Theater near Lake Norman, that property no longer generates taxes to the county. So it's a fair question, not just for donors to Elevation, but also for the rest of us as taxpayers. What are we getting in exchange for these tax breaks? And what is Pastor Stephen getting? He doesn't have to tell you, and he's not going to. Stuart Watson, NBC Charlotte. When we first reported how Elevation pastor Stephen Furtick was building a 16,000 square foot home, we got a lot of complaints from his supporters. Ashley Todd pretty much summed it up, writing, "So what if he builds a huge house? How is that any concern of yours or anyone else's?" Well, the answer is, if you're a taxpayer, it is your concern, because pastors don't pay income taxes on the salary they get for housing. It's called a parsonage allowance, and when preachers are exempt from paying a big chunk of income taxes, guess who does pay?
This ain't right. This ain't right.
Pastor Stephen Furtick will not reveal how much Elevation Church pays him as a tax-free parsonage allowance.
It's not that great of a house.
But his mentor, Pastor Ed Young Jr. in Dallas, gets about $250,000 a year tax-free just for housing. Elevation Church pays 24 ordained pastors parsonage allowances, yet no one will say how much.
It's a big house. It's a beautiful house.
But my question about the parsonage allowance doesn't start or end with Pastor Stephen and his big house.
I believe or feel that God called me to be here.
17 years ago, as a young reporter at WRAL in Raleigh, I wanted to know why the CEO of Goodwill Industries of Eastern North Carolina, a man named Dennis McLean, got $54,000 a year just for expenses.
As a Methodist minister assigned to Goodwill Industries, I get a parsonage allowance.
Of $54,000 a year.
Whatever it is, but that's a parsonage allowance. That's correct.
Is that fair?
The fair has nothing to do with it.
McLean declined to speak to me again. Fair or not, just because he's ordained, McLean gets a tax break for a parsonage. Even though he doesn't pastor a church, he works at Goodwill. Now the Raleigh News and Observer reports McLean and his wife, also at Goodwill, earn nearly $800,000 a year. And thanks in large part to the parsonage allowance, more than $147,000 of that is tax-free.
We think that's unfair.
Dan Barker is a co-president of the Freedom From Religion Foundation, a national group of atheists and agnostics.
I was an ordained minister. After 19 years of believing, really believing and preaching the gospel, I changed my mind.
When Dan was a preacher, he got a tax break for housing.
You don't even have to report it. It was nice. I mean, who wouldn't want that advantage, you know? I mean, if you're paying your taxes, you want every break you can get.
But as atheists, Barker and his wife and co-president, Andy Laurie Gaylor, sued the IRS over the parsonage exemption.
And the rest of us pay more because clergy pay less. They need to pay their fair share.
The atheists sued in federal court in Madison, Wisconsin, where their headquarters is.
And we are seeking an end to the parsonage exemption, which we think is unconstitutional.
They claim the parsonage allowance violates the so-called Establishment Clause in the First Amendment to the Constitution because Congress gave a tax break to clergy but not to all nonprofits.
And sometimes we're seeing stupendous housing allowances, overpaid ministers.
The bigger the house, the bigger the tax break, because the parsonage allowance is limited only by the fair market rental value of the pastor's home.
So if you choose to live in the Sistine Chapel or a mansion, you can't claim more than the fair rental value, but that could be astronomical.
Building this house, and I'm real excited about it and everything.
Dan and Annie Laurie couldn't care less what Elevation Church pays Stephen Furtick. They do care about the tax break.
If they want to pay the pastor $50 million a year, we're not complaining about that. That's freedom. But if they are excluding housing from taxation, tax liability, then that's hurting all of us.
And thanks to the secrecy Congress affords churches, taxpayers have no idea how much the parsonage allowance is even worth.
It's shielded from public scrutiny, and yet the public are subsidizing churches.
You see, most nonprofits have to make their tax forms public.
You can go online right now and you can see my salary. You can see our organization's income and expenses down to the penny. We have to be accountable.
We know what Goodwill pays Dennis and Linda McLean because the nonprofit makes its tax forms public.
If you are a tax-exempt organization, then your business is everybody's business.
But think about it. When it comes to being accountable, the atheists are now more forthcoming than some Christians.
We hear that churches, everything they do is good, and they're being given this tax exemption to do good, and yet why keep it secret? What do they have to hide?
Only last week, a federal judge in Wisconsin handed the atheists a first-round victory. The judge ruled the tax break for the parsonage allowance is unconstitutional and should be thrown out. The decision will almost certainly be appealed. Stuart Watson, NBC Charlotte.
Now to an exclusive I-Team investigation focused on houses of the holy, multi-million-dollar homes for clergy, some of them right here in the Charlotte area. Some folks might say that's up to the congregation, nobody's business but theirs. But new tonight, our Stuart Watson found preachers can get a big housing allowance tax-free and keep it secret.
Preachers, really all clergy, don't have to pay income taxes on whatever they're paid for housing, no matter how much that is. They don't even have to tell you about it. We talked to a CPA who broke it down for us. He says it all started once upon a time when the preacher, the pastor, the parish priest lived in modest houses called parsonages.
When I was growing up, Monsignor O'Brien and Father Petracci and Father McTagg, they lived in the rectory and they had a little tunnel almost to walk over to the church.
But nowadays, some Charlotte preachers live in million-dollar homes, and here's where you come in. They get tax breaks to do it.
Clergy housing allowances can be in the hundreds of thousands.
When you let go of the uncommon seed of $1,000, the windows of heaven is going to open up on your life.
Todd Kuntz preaches the gospel of prosperity on TV, that God wants you to be rich if you'll just send Todd some money.
God gave me a home that I paid cash for.
Todd's church, Rock Wealth International, owns $1 million condo where he lives here at the Rosewood on the corner of Providence and Sharon Amity. But here's the thing. He doesn't even have to tell you if he gets a tax-free housing allowance. He didn't return our phone call and letter last week, so we really don't know.
You don't have transparency with churches. That's probably, to me, one of the biggest problems with churches compared to other not-for-profits.
Peter J. Riley is a CPA from Massachusetts who's written on Forbes.com about the parsonage benefit of the clergy, why special tax treatment needs to go.
Churches are kind of a black hole.
Philip and Cheryl Jackson of the Grace Christian Center live in this $2 million home in Ballantyne. That's between them and their congregation. They didn't return our phone call, email, and letter last week, so we don't know whether they get a tax break, and if so, how much. Under the law, the only limit to the size of the tax break is the fair market rental value of the home, how much it would rent for. So the bigger the house, the bigger the tax break.
There is no limit.
Bishop C.M. Bailey of the United House of Prayer for All People stays in this house when he's in Charlotte. It's not even his full-time residence. The United House of Prayer owns the $3 million estate with its 16,000-square-foot home on West Sugar Creek near Derrida. Because the church owns the home, it pays no property taxes. But the bishop also owns his own private home in the Washington, D.C. area. He didn't return our call to his attorney or our letter, so we don't know if he gets a housing allowance for his private home, but he's still eligible for one, just not for more than one home.
The rule is one house. It can be a really big house, but only one.
Do you feel like you're trapped?
David Cerullo of the Inspirational TV Network lives in this $1.7 million home near 51 and Ray Road. Because Mr. Cerullo works for a ministry and not a church, we can look up his non-taxable benefits. You ready? $372,311 per year, most of that for housing. But for most of us in the Carolinas, that's not a housing allowance, that's a whole house.
The clergy are very influential on both sides of the aisle.
So while Congress sides with the preacher's lobby, Peter O'Reilly has a suggestion to reform the loophole. Cap the tax break. Limit it. the same way the U.S. military does.
That would be a reasonable way to weed out much of the abuse. If you said, have as many houses as you want, but you're only going to get $3,000 or $4,000 a month tax-free.
But that would take an act of Congress, and Congress has not been inclined to act. There are lots of lobbyists in Washington, but few more powerful than the church. Stuart Watson, NBC Charlotte.
Tonight at 5:30, the results of a 6-month investigation into a mega church that treats its leader like a king but throws an elderly woman out onto the street. Hello, everybody. I'm Bill McGinty. Our NBC Charlotte I-Team is back again, investigating a mega church and the mega money it collects. Stuart Watson is, of course, following the money and finds one of the leading contributors to the church stole the money she put in the collection plate.
They call him Sweet Daddy Bailey, the bishop of the United House of Prayer for All People, a denomination with tens of thousands of followers and deep roots in the Carolinas. Sweet Daddy's followers treat him like a king. Our hidden cameras show followers showering him with cash money. He rides in ultra luxury and lives in mansions, one of them right here in Charlotte. Sweet Daddy Bailey celebrates big donors, but the NBC Charlotte I-Team found some of those contributions came from millions of dollars in stolen money. But if you owe the church money, it will put you out, quite literally, on the street.
Somebody that can be a witness for God, sing it with me. Lord, He touched.
Ronald Belton preached his whole life for the United House of Prayer.
I was born and raised in the church.
He was the church's national evangelist.
To bring thee.
So when he got prostate cancer, he asked Bishop Bailey for help.
His words were, you knew this day was coming, you should have saved you some money. I was deeply hurt. Deeply hurt.
The bishop lives in wealth. Our hidden cameras documented that when Bishop Bailey enters a church, members crowd the aisles to press cash money into his hands. He reaches out to pick the green bills. They're handing him cash money.
Cash money.
How much?
It varies. It may be from $1 to $100.
We saw some choirs process up the aisle of the church with cash money held up in front of them as offerings to Sweet Daddy Bailey. So from the moment he comes in to the moment he exits, it's one long stream of cash money.
Yes.
It's written right into the church's supreme laws that free will love offerings will be collected for the bishop whenever he's present.
This Bishop Bailey, he's put on a program which he called Daddy's Club, and which he somewhat requires every member to try to push to have $2,000 every time he returns.
Reverend Belton says Daddy's Club is a church building fund, but it's hard to say exactly where all that money goes. Can you get an audited financial statement of where all of that money goes?
No.
You didn't know where the money went?
No. In our general assembly, there's no financial statement.
But you can see some of the church's wealth in real estate. Sweet Daddy Bailey stays in this 16,000 square foot mansion in the Derrida neighborhood whenever he's in Charlotte. Owned by the church for the use of the bishop, by law, the $3 million estate pays no property taxes. But the bishop visits here less than a month each year. And during the other 11 months of the year, who stays in that house?
No one.
Nobody?
Nobody.
Sweet Daddy Bailey travels with a uniformed entourage. He rides on a throne in a parade in Washington, D.C. each Memorial Day. He arrived at the church on Beatty's-Ford Road in Charlotte earlier this year in a custom German-made Maybach automobile.
That's one of the most expensive cars in the world.
And as trustee of the United House of Prayer, the bishop is also a landlord, managing apartments in Charlotte and Washington. 2 years ago, a retired D.C. bus driver had cancer, got behind on her rent to the church.
I knew I should have paid rent because my mother always said, baby, pay your rent if you don't pay nothing else.
That's Sarah Boulware Owens. She's 79 years old. Evicted today from her home at the McCullough Canaan Land Apartments.
The United House of Prayer put her out, stacking all her worldly possessions on the street.
Her record player, her television set, even her records. Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, Dinah Washington.
Let's get this straight. The bishop leaves a $3 million mansion empty most of the year in Charlotte while putting a 79-year-old woman on the streets of D.C. Is that right?
I don't think so. This church should provide assistance for their members.
After Ronald Belton clashed with Bishop Bailey, the bishop stripped him of his church credentials, according to a lawsuit filed by Belton.
I was excommunicated.
Why? He says it was because he let a woman walk too close to the bishop's throne, a kind of holy of holies called Daddy's Mountain.
Some members became emotional that she's on Daddy's Mountain.
And when Belton tried to visit a United House of Prayer earlier this year, the visiting preacher, one of Bailey's men, called him a clown right from the pulpit.
Ronald McDonald, clown. So I'm putting it out there. If you let Ronald Belton mess your mind up, you crazy.
They make it so uncomfortable because there are a lot of statements that have been made by the bishop that I was the evil one.
While Ronald Belton's been kicked out of the United House of Prayer and mocked as a clown, another member has been praised in the church. But she had something Ronald Belton didn't have, millions of dollars. The only problem was that she stole it. Maryland woman admits stealing millions from D.C. nonprofit. That's the headline, straight from the Washington Post.
To the tune of, get this, $5.1 million.
Ephonia Green pled guilty to stealing $5 million from the nonprofit where she worked. The feds say she spent that money on her bridal gown business, her homes, her cars, and, wait for it, her church. That church? The United House of Prayer, where Reverend Belton says she was praised as one of the top 10 contributors.
She can still go to church.
She still goes to church. She still has her seat. And she's still recognized as top 10.
And she's welcome.
And she's welcome.
You're not welcome.
No.
Ephonia Green is waiting to be sentenced in the federal court in D.C. Ronald Belton sued Bishop Bailey in Charlotte, claiming Sweet Daddy Bailey wrongfully terminated him and even encouraged Belton's wife to leave him. The judge here tossed the suit.
I've given my whole life. It's just like when you don't have nothing to give, we through with you.
I called the United House of Prayer in D.C. last week twice, and when I mentioned the name Ephonia Green, the receptionist hung up on me twice. I called the Charlotte lawyer who represented the bishop in Ronald Belton's lawsuit and sent a letter FedEx to the bishop and got no response. Ronald Belton says he has no hard feelings, but he'd like to refile his lawsuit, possibly in federal court, but he has limited funds to do it. Within the church, the bishop is like the Pope. There is no appeal. It's called the United House of Prayer for all people, but Daddy's Club is just for those with the money. Stuart Watson, NBC Charlotte.